Welcome to another lore video, and this will be the last in the series of Aftermath videos as this chapter ends. What will come next and what stories it will produce, we'll have to see. This video, as the name suggests, is a retrospective on the war, looking back at what we liked, what we didn't, what could have been better, what we'd like to have seen, and so on. While no such analysis could ever be complete, there's always something else you can think of. There's always more ideas you can cover. But I've tried to make it at least comprehensive, with hopefully a good balance of the positives and negatives and most of the suggestions made by players. It's been put together from the thoughts of many of the individuals and groups involved, and discusses many of the common factors that were brought up by those who participated in the war against the Titans. When Tyrannus arrived, and systems around it were immediately devastated without any chance of stopping it, the objective was clearly to hit us with a bit of shock and awe. And it worked. We were pretty taken aback at the number of systems that got turned into controls with no way of preventing it. And then we had the bug for the first week where systems were ticking down once a day instead of once a week, which took many more systems before they fixed it. To be fair, they did fix that one quickly, but they left the systems controlled, so it put us further on the back foot than was perhaps necessary. Either way, there we were, with a ton of Thargoid-controlled systems and a stack of invasions and alerts every week. After a few weeks of observation and testing, we quickly saw that any populated alert left unattended became an invasion, and any unpopulated alert became a control system, and any invasion would also become a control system. And it was also possible for systems to become alerted again a couple of weeks after being cleared. We knew that within a month or so. But knowing that and being able to do something about it were two different things, and particularly with preventing systems being re-alerted, we could only be reactive to start with. There was no chance of developing any long-term strategy until we understood more about how the war machine worked. Taking out invasions and alerts wouldn't do anything except preserve the status quo from the previous week. It stopped them getting any new systems, but it did nothing to reduce the ones they had already, and did nothing to stop them attacking future systems. The control systems must be causing the alerts every week, but there were too many of them to simply strike out blindly and hope. So to make progress, we needed to know more about how those alerts happened in the first place. We needed to know at least two things before we could get any further: the attack range of a control system, and which specific controls were the attackers. Then we could start crippling the Titan's ability to attack by taking out key systems. That wasn't a fast process because we had to spend weeks observing how the Titans attacked and expanded, and so it took the first few months to nail down the details and confirm or deny the assumptions we had to make until we knew for sure which ones were right. The contributions and analysis of people like Ian Doncaster, Itri Bio, Alex Zuno, and many others, and all the groups that did testing to confirm or deny all of the ideas that were flying around. Eventually, all of that came together and led to the understanding of the war machine that we needed. Ian said, "Obviously I liked digging up the various hidden details of how the Thargoids worked, and was quite surprised on the occasions it was useful." Well, you shouldn't have been, Ian, because you are an excellent analyst, and we knew you'd nail it down sooner or later, even if it meant exhausting every assumption possible before finding the right ones. Lots of good ideas in the way the basic mechanisms fitted together, which have gone on to work well in new power play. This is fair comment. The mechanisms of the war did fit together well, and developed more or less logically as a consequence of each other, and that served FDev well in terms of designing interconnected jobs for power play. So the initial setup was fine as far as it went. We get initially overwhelmed with a rapid expansion we can't stop, with invasions we can just about cope with, and it's going to take us some time to learn how the war machine operates and how best to mobilise ourselves, coordinate with others, and only then can we think about turning the tide and ultimately defeating them. No problem there, it gave everyone a good challenge, but not an insurmountable one. Alex Zuno said that the methodical ways the Thargoids chose to attack made it very good to analyse and counter. So analysing the war machine may have taken a hectic few months while we desperately fought to manage the invasions and alerts, but at least it was logical once we worked it out, and the analysts had fun doing it. Again, no problem there. The way it mobilised individuals and groups to work together and coordinate their efforts was the best part for me. Bringing together players from all over the place who'd normally be doing their own thing, and meeting so many people from so many different parts of the game, and the camaraderie we developed was a highlight of the war for me. They did a good job of inspiring the kind of camaraderie between people that you might imagine happening in a real war, as people joined forces to face a common enemy. All of that was great. Our friends and allies at Operation Ida agree. We do feel the war was a fantastically designed piece of content and appreciated the opportunity to be a part of it and to work with so many player groups. We'd never seen something on this scale, so it was great to take part in it over the last 2 years. Although it became predictable, it felt good to still be appreciated and respected by the community for our efforts. But there is a fundamental problem with doing things like this. If you have a story that needs players to get to a certain stage with an automated system before the next bit of story happens, the story is then obviously either held back or speeded up by how slowly or quickly they can do it. That's great for a player-driven narrative, but you can't tell a dynamic story that way. Of course, every story leads the reader or the player. Every story drip feeds you the plot. But the trick is to make people suspend their disbelief and go with it. Instead, the stage-managed nature of it stood out even more because an automated system and a dynamic narrative are mutually exclusive. Anytime players got ahead of the plot, or occasionally behind, whether it was because FDev didn't have the next bit ready yet, or whether they wanted certain stages to last a certain amount of time, it led to very obvious pacing problems which can only break immersion and take you out of the story. Ida said, "We feel the overall mechanics of the war itself were well thought out and there was a definite sense of danger initially. However, that eventually passed as the processes became understood, causing a predictable weekly repetition to set in. This could have been helped by some form of change to the mechanics every now and then to mix things up. Instead, the war began to feel stale and only the occasional end of a Titan brought any feeling of interest back. This can be seen by how the end of the war stands out due to its deviations from the norm. Situations like the sudden attack on Shinrata and Kasio's final push to the attack on Sol being clear high points in the narrative. So the general consensus is that the mechanics of the war were well implemented, fit together well, and once we understood them, they were logical and something we could plan a proper strategy around, and working it out was all part of the fun. The story when we got it wasn't bad, but as well as a few more twists, it would have been nice to see stuff that fleshed it out when there was nothing else going on, except waiting for us to get to the next bit, or better still, a few more non-war stories for those who weren't doing it every day or had no interest in the war at all. Balance was another reason for many of the pacing problems, and this was an area where they didn't do so well. Not just with difficulty swings that went from one extreme to the other, but with the activities in general. Rescues and deliveries worked okay in invasions and populated alerts, and AX, fighting the Thargoids, worked well in invasions, but there were problems in other systems. The biggest one was not getting the war progress for doing what they wanted us to do. For months we were told to kill Orthraces to make progress in alert systems, and we did. We killed thousands of them, but they made very little difference to war progress. The same thing happened in controls, with combat doing virtually nothing, and when that's the main thing to do in a control, that's a problem. Unpopulated systems were also impossible to clear in any kind of reasonable time, with activities like kills and salvage. The only thing that worked consistently was sampling, which we turned to out of necessity because all the other things they were telling us to do weren't working. When you have a wing of Top Gun anti-Xeno pilots going into a controlled system and clearing conflict zone after conflict zone and barely moving the progress bar, and then someone comes in, grabs 100 samples and moves the bar 5%, it doesn't make any sense, and it certainly wasn't because we wanted it that way. It's on FDev for not including the proper progress for the activities they wanted us to do. Sampling became the only way to clear the systems we needed to in the week we needed to, in order to make any progress at all. Unpopulated systems could only be cleared by sampling because just one system took weeks by any other method, and with alerts, you only had a week to clear them, so nothing else was viable. Our strategy depended on two things: stopping the Titans from getting any new systems, and reducing the systems they had already. If we couldn't do that, we couldn't defeat them. Simple as. This is where I decided we could help, by clearing the unpopulated alerts, thanks to our allies at IDA and Marauder Shadowguard and the fact that invasions were the most popular system state. Invasions were going pretty well by then, and people got on top of them the moment they happened. If a few populated alerts went to invasion because they weren't cleared that week, that was okay too, although in reality it rarely happened. But the unpopulated alerts would become new control systems, and that had to be stopped. So while sampling teams were taking out key control systems, we created a secondary operation, Operation Kleenex, and we used sampling to clear all of the unpopulated alerts to stop them becoming new controls. We had a small team with a couple of us, a couple of people from our allies at IDA and Marauder Shadowguard, and a few from other groups or individual pilots who just pitched in, and for several months Operation Kleenex was able to clear all of the unpopulated alerts in the week they appeared. In this way, we were able to help the people clearing the controls by not giving them any more to do than they already had, and they could concentrate on clearing some of the existing controls, which would gradually reduce the Titan's ability to make future attacks. And slowly but surely, over several months, we brought the Titans to a standstill and put ourselves into a position where we could then start reducing the systems they had, either reclaiming them for humanity or returning them to uninhabited. We'd all much rather have had combat working in controls and salvage working in unpopulated alerts instead of sampling for months on end, but until they fixed the activities to work as advertised, we had no choice. So instead, we all got PTSD, post-traumatic sampling disorder. While that was going on, FDev also took some major gambles with player patience that could have gone wrong very easily. The main two examples of this are the Titans and the Spire sites. When we finally got a way to get through the maelstroms and reach the Titans, we could reach them, we could take samples from them to sell, but we couldn't do anything to hurt them for several more weeks until the nanite torpedo got invented. When Spire sites came in, they were control systems, so they could attack nearby systems and cause new alerts every week, but for several weeks nothing we did made any progress in them, so they couldn't be taken out. They were, to all intents and purposes, invincible. With the Titan it wasn't so bad. We still had plenty of systems to clear, and not being able to hit the Titan yet wasn't an immediate problem. But the Spire sites being unassailable was. By then, we were getting on top of clearing control systems, and now, suddenly, we had controls that couldn't be cleared but could still cause alerts. They really should have been stopped from making attacks of their own until we could affect them. Putting in things players can do nothing about for weeks on end is a huge gamble. You're asking them to trust you to give them a way to do it eventually, and when players are already feeling that their concerns were being ignored, it really wasn't a good move. This was during a hard time for FDev and all British companies. They were dealing with economic problems not of their own making, problems that affected the whole country, and they had a lot of redundancies and reorganising to do. But as I said before, hard times are when you should be listening to your players more than ever, not ignoring them, which is only going to further erode player trust. If the activities had the correct progress for them put in from the start, so everything worked properly from the start, and all the bugs had been fixed faster than they were, there would have been steady progress that would have stopped people from burning out after long nights of achieving very little. So this is absolutely on FDev for not doing their bit and testing the patience of their player base at a time when they should have been paying more attention to the only people who supported them than ever. The government didn't care about them, other companies didn't care about them, so their players, the people who buy and play their games, were the only ones who cared about them staying in business, and feeling ignored wasn't good. Plus, being acknowledged is a basic human courtesy, and being dismissive towards your player base is never a good look, even when you don't have problems of your own. When the effectiveness of sampling was eventually dropped, at least twice, to discourage us from doing it. That would have been fine if the other activities had changed so that they worked instead. But it was several months before they made the long overdue activity balance patch. That didn't happen until we were on our 4th Titan, Indra. Until then we could still only use sampling, only now it was twice as hard. And there's no good reason for that either, because the balance patch they finally did, it was simple, it was effective, it got the balance almost perfect, and it made every activity valuable. But it shouldn't have taken over a year for all of the activities to work properly for war progress. At least there is one positive from it though. Since then they have learned to respond in a more timely manner and not make players feel like they're being completely ignored, and they're much better and quicker when addressing these things in power play. Like all things in Elite, a bit of responsiveness to all community feedback would have made for an even better experience, and going forward we hope and look forward to Frontier being open and interested in our views, our concerns, and our enthusiasm for upcoming content like colonisation. Just don't forget, interest is a two-way street. Another thing that affected player involvement was the fun factor. The most fun systems to do were invasions, hands down. They were by far the most popular. For those who were just getting into anti-Xeno combat, the attacked ground ports were a way to ease themselves into it, with no interceptor swarms to worry about, which are the biggest headache for a newbie. And for those who didn't want to fight, there were other things to do which made war progress. Rescuing and delivering under fire was a rush. It forced us to adapt our procedures, which was brilliant. Size became the new threat for rescuers and added an extra risk to counter. Thargoids being able to interdict you in supercruise was a shock the first time it happened to me, and again forced us to find ways to deal with them. Everything about our operation changed, from our ship builds to our tactics, and working out how to do that was hectic, but a lot of fun as well. On the downside, systems with stations far from the star were often left, because the interdictions could be ruthless and relentless, and downright brutal at times, making rescues too time consuming for their benefit to be really felt, and it was better and faster to clear those systems by parking at the station and fighting instead. At least until towards the end, when we got the SCO drives and the T8 came into its own as our go-to medium rescue ship. Nothing had the same fun factor as invasions though. Alerts are not as much fun by comparison, but the populated ones were good for doing rescues and deliveries with no interdictions. You still got high-predicted on the way in by regular interceptors, and high-predicted on the way out by a scythe if you had people on board. But they were a good option for new players who wanted to do rescues, who felt that rescuing from an invasion without much money or engineering was too risky to start with. And they used alerts to build up a bit first, use the cash and material rewards for rescue missions in alerts to make their ships a bit more tanky, and bank a few more rebuys than going on into invasions. So populated alerts were quite a good training ground for new people to build their ships up, and then go into invasions feeling a little bit more confident that they wouldn't be blown away and left with no ships and no money. But the way the war machine worked meant that sooner or later all the invasions and alerts around any given Titan would be gone, with only control systems left to do there, which meant there would only be fighting left to do there, and non-combatants felt that this was when there was nothing more for them. For those who wanted non-combative ways to help, and didn't want to be forced into combat, to have nothing else to do in controls except fight, once they fixed the activities so fighting worked, was a mistake. As a non-combative squad ourselves, we can sympathise with this, and I want to spend a couple of minutes on the war from the point of view of non-combatants, because the combat side is already well covered by other content providers, but not so much the humanitarian side. Systems auto-repairing after being cleared. I can understand why FDev did it, because they didn't want us stuck on repairs and they wanted us to get on with clearing Titans. But it contributed to the lack of humanitarian options. It was obviously a huge issue for our friends at Operation Ida, who felt rightly robbed of their roleplay when they didn't have to repair systems anymore. At first, I admit, I perhaps misguidedly tried to cheer them up by saying, well look, maybe it's not so bad because it frees you up to try the other activities, you're not stuck doing repairs all the time and missing out on those other war experiences. And that did happen. Some of Ida fought Thargoids and a lot of them did rescues. They actually became the largest rescue squad in the war because they got more people than us. But then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, that's not right, is it? It's robbing Ida of what they do best. The other activities don't really compensate for losing out like that, and ignoring their core reason for existing, and you can't just gloss over that like it doesn't matter. They said to me, Ida were extremely disappointed that the station repair mechanic was converted into an automated recovery phase. We felt a bit forced to adapt to more combat-oriented activities to keep our members engaged in the new content. We took a lot of pride spending the last 4 years helping the community and humanity as a whole by bringing a sense of tranquility with our efforts to bring stations, players' homes, back online. It was saddening to know that our role had been taken from us. The recovery mechanics seemed to generally make station repairs become a waste of time, especially early in the war when it became clear that it was more advantageous to let a system repair itself over the 4-week timer compared to rushing to clear it and then having it targeted immediately afterwards. Yeah, this is true. We were using the recovery time as a tactic, as a buffer while we dealt with the other attacks, and people were being actively discouraged from repairing systems because then they'd only get re-invaded faster. Couple that with the repair lists that asked for commodities that were mission reward only, mineable only, and hard to source like meta-alloys. These required commodities felt randomised with little regard to the player's time and credit balance, with some of them costing members upwards of 50 billion credits in total to purchase or source. This was discouraging to anyone who wanted to get involved in the war in a non-combative role. Yes, indeed. And especially newbies with no resources looking to build up their cash. Unlike alert and invasion systems, which paid pretty well, the recovery systems didn't earn you anywhere near the same level of profits, and could even cost the player to help out. Like the rescue boards running out of missions, the often ludicrous requirements to repair a station, with items that are specific, hard to get, or cost you time and money before you can even make a start, is a long-term problem, and like rescues, still hadn't been fixed by the war. Ida said, there were a few unique situations like Shinrata and Sol, which were huge achievements and something we take great pride in regardless of any monetary loss. And rightly so. Restoring those systems came as no surprise to me because I still remember when Ida restored the best part of 100 stations in under 6 months in the latter half of 3305 after the first wave of attacks. And it's no secret to anyone who knows me that I think they never truly got the recognition they deserved for that. Ida are, and always have been, the faction whose efficiency, organisation and sheer hard work inspired me to encourage as much of that efficiency and strong work ethic as possible into the PDES. A small squad can punch above its weight if it's efficient, organised and focused, as we proved in the war, and Ida have always been my role model for that, setting the benchmark to aim for. So this is something that the majority of players said they wanted at some point, a wider range of activities to do in alerts and controls, and more systems to do them in. They could have included plenty of other things to do which wouldn't have needed much to implement, just variations on the missions mostly. To give one example, the flow of information is vital in wartime, so they could have had missions to retrieve valuable war information from black boxes, where a fast ship that could get in and out and evade attacks could be used by the non-combatants, while the combatants could choose whether to fight as well, with war progress given for any retrievals or kills. The AX reactivation missions were great, fantastic addition, really popular, but there weren't enough of them, and they didn't go to enough systems, only ever to a few of the controls that existed. And then they vanished with a patch that gave us the Python Mark II, and didn't come back till the end in the Sol system, which was a shame because they were really, really good. And an alternative place to get tactical core ships apart from at a spire site. More missions like that, preferably to all of the previously populated controls, with bonuses that represented the extra time to do them, would have been ideal. Sabotaging spire sites was another great new piece of gameplay, but had to be carefully coordinated with anybody fighting there, because sabotage attempts would ramp up the instance for the people fighting. Nevertheless, they were a lot of fun too, kind of like Elite meets Tomb Raider. A point made by Alex and others is that every activity should have had missions for it, which could be got from nearby human systems, and I have to agree that this would have been a great way to make every activity count, because it would then get a mission bonus, which would count towards war progress. It was what the activity balance patch eventually did as well. It made everything that had a mission more effective by a simple increase to the mission bonus for it. So this feels like another missed opportunity to provide for more than just the AX pilots. Soldiers win battles, but logistics wins wars, so more to do from that side of things would have been nice. The spire sites themselves are a work of art. They look absolutely stunning and the design is incredible. The amount of detail and the work put into their creation is amazing, like a nightmare by H.R. Geiger. Although they should have been marked more clearly once commanders had discovered them, so they were easier for everyone else to find. Same with the Titans. Their arrival and introduction was a mysterious and terrifying event. Coming out of the maelstrom and seeing a Titan for the first time was a real Hollywood moment. The detailing was excellent, and the sound design, as always, was impeccable. Combat with them, and with Thargoid ships in Titan space, was thrilling and engaging for the most part, although bombing the Titan itself got to be a bit of a grind, and their eventual explosions were one of the more spectacular sights in a game that's already filled with incredible visuals. There could have been more ways to interact with them, but you can't fault the look, the sound, the atmosphere, all of which are top notch, or the fact that they included their explosions as real-time events, no matter what you were in, open, private, group or solo, and integrated them seamlessly into your instance wherever you were. Fantastic job there. The ingenuity of reusing things in the game continued, and this is something FDev are really good at, finding new and clever ways to reuse old assets. The FSD reboot missiles fired by the Size and the Glaive, they're a retooling of the missile from Yuri Grom. The lightning attack that slows you down is a version of the experimental effect drag munitions, which you can put on guns and missiles to stop enemies from accelerating and boosting. That ingenuity is something I've always liked. The power play special command fleet carriers and their escorts could be broken up in reused Titans for all I know, but I love this aspect as much as I love seeing new things. Counterstrikes were an interesting idea, but they had the following issue. They never made much sense. Originally they were called frontline systems and were supposed to represent the spearhead of a Titan's expansion, with the implication that taking them out would hurt the Titan more than, say, taking out a regular control. Except the systems that actually caused expansions by creating new alerts were regular controls, and they still caused them if they weren't cleared as well. Another difference was supposed to be that Counter-Strikes would have conflict zones where regular controls would not, but over time we saw conflict zones appear in some of the regular controls as well, so this was never consistent. It does seem, as a few people have noted, as if they were put in first and then a decision about what to do with them wasn't made till afterwards. Or perhaps the idea was changed somewhere between concept and code, so by the time it was implemented it bore little resemblance to how it had first been imagined. We don't know, but the mixed messages about them and how they actually worked in practice did make us wonder what, exactly, they were actually for. They did have the potential to be cleared en masse, because pods rescued from Titans advanced the war progress of all Counter-Strikes, at least to start with. Later this was changed to the Outer 15. Along with Spire sites, which also progressed the outermost 10 systems, Counter-Strikes had the potential to help clear multiple systems faster. But it was only towards the end that Counter-Strikes finally got a purpose that fitted their name, by having one port active that you could park and fight at, effectively launching a Counter-Strike in that system. Again though, there were no missions, which would have been a good addition, even if you had to get them from neighbouring systems. Players generally agree that it would have been better just for all control systems to have some AX conflict zones and let commanders choose where to strike. Another suggestion was that perhaps they could have let us create our own Counter-Strike systems by using the AX reactivation missions to activate ports in systems of our choosing, This would have been interesting if we'd had the choice of which previously populated control systems to turn into Counterstrikes, and we could use AX reactivations and perhaps some other missions as well to do so. There were several developments and changes throughout the war. New technology was developed like the caustic sinks and the nanite torpedo, while other technology was an adaptation of something that had gone before, like the Thargoid pulse neutralizer and the extraction missiles. Getting the materials for the caustic sinks and other things was well done, getting you used to what the Maelstrom was like before having to navigate it to reach the Titan. The way any new gameplay was introduced was intuitive, and it felt like a natural progression. The enhanced AX multi-cannons worked well, and so did the azimuth enhanced ones with autoloader. The Salvation modified shard cannons were popular, and later on the regular Guardian shard cannons once they got Ramtar's protection from degrading in Titan systems. Generally the weapons we got, and the improvements to the ones we already had, were pretty good. For a while though, the AX purists were a bit upset because the introduction of a lot more scouts in the conflict zones, plus the occasional glaive, meant their optimised build for killing interceptors was no longer ideal. Or, if you were going to use one, then winging up with someone with a multi-cannon build was favourite, someone who could keep the scouts and glaives off your back while you concentrated on the interceptors. As with rescues, this forced people to change their tactics and work in new ways, and in teams. So although some people weren't keen, I see this as a good thing overall. New situations require new ways of working. The Spire sites gave us the means to get to the Titans. The Grelics, the Guardian relics that were turned from blue to green after putting them into a Thargoid site, generated nanites that became the basis for the nanite torpedo. The new technology was a plausible extension of the new discoveries, so that was pretty good, if a little light on detail. When the balance patch came in and we were able to take down Indra with a full range of activities, which came as a great relief because Indra was the hardest Titan to keep under control and stop from spamming alerts, due to having the highest star density. A few other changes came in with it. Up until Indra, the number of systems a Titan had was never a factor in which one we chose to do first, or next. The first 4 Titans were not done in the order of the number of systems they had, because the number of systems by itself is not the best indicator of how easy or difficult a Titan is. One with a lot of systems, but half of them quite far out, could be taken out faster than a Titan with fewer systems, but more of them closer to it. Then there's the actual position of the systems in space. Is it easy for them to attack lots of targets, or are there fewer targets in range? These and other factors were far more important than the sheer number of systems when deciding which Titan we could take down and how long it would take to do it. But after Indra, the choice of which to do next did become the one with the fewest systems because of the changes that came with the balance patch. The Titan with the fewest systems would have the most counterstrikes, and every control system would have conflict zones, so any choice about which one to do next was gone, because it made no sense to do any other Titan except the ones with the most ways to defeat it. There was a definite feeling by then that they wanted it over, but the strategists were a little bit unhappy because any subtlety or nuance was gone and it was just a race to the end. Another change was that they stopped attacking unpopulated systems. In practice, since it used unpopulated systems to get to populated ones, this actually crippled the Titan's ability to expand all by itself. With only a 10 light-year attack range for control systems, and the much larger number of unpopulated systems compared to populated ones, it made targeting key systems and reducing the number of attacks for the Titans that remained far easier. Following this came another change, with the closest 3 populated alerts to the Titan bypassing the alert stage and going straight to invasion. This was seen as a good move, and many people thought this is maybe what they should have done from the start. We were also told sometime during these final changes that Spire sites would no longer be necessary to clear the systems around a Titan, and that was welcome because the placement of the Spire sites meant they had to be used very carefully, according to a plan, and at specific times only, if their effectiveness wasn't to be lost. Taking lots of unpopulated systems made no real sense after the initial shock and awe of it. Oh my god, look how many systems they have, how are we going to take back that lot? But beyond that initial impact, it didn't really fit with the idea that they were after people. And just about everybody said that instead of having all those unpopulated systems with nothing much to do in them, which nobody really enjoyed doing, and were only being used as stepping stones to populated systems anyway, they would have preferred it if the controls had a longer attack range and hit populated systems only, which would then go straight to invasion. There could still be some uninhabited systems, perhaps within the range of a previously populated control, that would be designated hostile territory or something, but the expansion would be driven by invasions into populated systems. In this way, players of all kinds could have stayed more involved. There would have been more invasions every week, which would be balanced by having more than a week to clear them, and we wouldn't have got moaned at for stopping them at the alert stage. Players had so many other good ideas too. I could never list them all without turning this more into War and Peace than it is already. But having reconnaissance missions into control systems to report on their current strength, with their current strength varying on what was happening there. So if a control was attacking that week, it would be a bit weaker because it would have to deploy some of its forces to do that, making it ripe for taking out while it was attacking us. That was another nice idea that came over. And a few people made the point that there could have been more in the way of lasting damage. I'd have said, overall we feel the old repair mechanic would have been far more impactful. Without the automated repairs, key systems and stations could be out of action indefinitely without community action. Beyond just a loss for our group, this felt like a loss for the community as a whole. With the threat of permanently damaged stations removed, a huge part of the danger in systems falling to Thargoid control was lost. We'd also like to have seen more invasions in the superpower's territory, since the Emperor's brain seems to still be frozen from her time at the hands of the NMLA in stasis. Most of the war was in independent space, and it did plenty of damage to the players there, if not to the powers. Some player factions really got hammered, like the Brazilian League of Pilots, who were almost wiped out without any way to defend themselves when Tyrannus arrived, and other player factions and groups were hit really hard by the other Titans. The revelation that they finally learned something about us came pretty late in the day, and I'd have personally liked to have seen more done with that idea. We've been left with the knowledge that despite defeating all 8 Titans, they now have more of an idea of how we think, our motivations and our tactics. But we're none the wiser about them. We reclaimed the systems they took. We destroyed all their Titans. We saw a few new things like the Hunters and the Titans and the Spire sites. But we found out nothing new about how the Thargoids think, or anything that added much more to what we already had. Which to me begs the question, who really won? And what are the consequences of what they've learned about us for the future? It does seem odd to bring in a major plot point like that and just leave it there, which is why many of us feel that although we may get a break from invasions for a while, there's more to come from the Thargoids. We also have the salvation narrative waiting in the wings, potential wars between the powers, leaving them all susceptible to future attacks while they're fighting each other, outlying areas like California, Witchhead and Coalsack being attacked again, and there are remnants of warlike conflict zones with even the odd glaive appearance, as reported recently by AXI. There's a possibility that perhaps through the Salvation narrative we learn more about the Guardians as well. There's even been speculation that they may wait until we start colonising and then attack those systems. Not very serious speculation, imagine the uproar, but it's been mentioned. We'll see what the new year brings, and what happens when power play settles down and some more balancing is done there and then, who knows. For now though, this chapter, Aftermath, is over. Stay safe and thanks for watching.